Welcome to today's video. Without these nations, the U.S. would collapse. You might think the United States, the world's largest economy, stands alone. But in our interconnected world, no nation is an island. From trade and resources to technology and labor, the U.S. relies on a network of countries to keep its economy thriving. In this video, we'll explore 15 nations critical to America's survival. If any of these broke relations or ended partnerships with the U.S., the ripple effects could trigger chaos, from supply chain breakdowns to economic downturns. Stick around to see why these nations matter and how their withdrawal could shake the U.S. to its core. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more eye-opening content. First up is China, the U.S.'s largest trading partner. China supplies everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals, making up over 16% of U.S. imports in 2024. Its manufacturing prowess keeps American shelves stocked and prices low. But it's not just goods. China holds trillions in U.S. debt, stabilizing financial markets. If China severed connections with the U.S., supply chains would collapse, inflation would spike, and the dollar could face pressure. Despite tensions over tariffs and geopolitics, as of April 2025, the U.S. still depends on China's economic engine. A trade cutoff would likely trigger a recession. Next is Canada, America's biggest oil supplier and closest neighbor. In 2025, Canada provides nearly 60% of U.S. crude oil imports, keeping energy prices stable. It also exports timber, minerals, and agricultural products, supporting industries from construction to food production. The U.S.-Canada border facilitates $2.6 billion in daily trade, making it a vital economic artery. If Canada broke relations with the U.S., energy shortages, higher costs, and disrupted supply chains would hit hard, especially with recent tariff threats from the Trump administration. Geopolitically, Canada's stability buffers the U.S. from northern threats. Mexico is another linchpin, hosting key manufacturing for autos, electronics, and more under the USMCA. In 2025, it's the U.S.'s second-largest export market and import source, with trade exceeding $800 billion annually. Mexican labor keeps costs low for American companies, while its proximity reduces shipping times. If Mexico ended partnerships with the U.S., auto production would stall, inflation would rise, and millions of jobs tied to cross-border trade could disappear. Recent tariff threats from the U.S. highlight this dependency, but also the risk of retaliation. Mexico's role in nearshoring and migration also stabilizes U.S. labor markets. Japan, a major U.S. ally, is critical for technology and investment. It's the second-largest foreign holder of U.S. debt, with over $1 trillion in Treasury securities as of 2025, helping fund government spending. Japan also supplies advanced components for cars, electronics, and defense systems. Its companies, like Toyota and Sony, create jobs in the U.S. If Japan withdrew from its alliances with the U.S., financial markets could destabilize, and supply chains for high-tech goods would collapse. Geopolitically, Japan's Pacific presence counters China, securing trade routes. Its departure would weaken U.S. economic and military strategies. Germany, Europe's economic powerhouse, is vital for U.S. trade and innovation. It's a top exporter of machinery, chemicals, and vehicles to the U.S., while German firms like Volkswagen and Siemens invest heavily in American jobs. Germany also collaborates on defense and technology, strengthening NATO. If Germany terminated its ties with the U.S. access to European markets and high-tech goods would shrink, raising costs. Financially, Europe's stability, anchored by Germany, supports global demand for U.S. exports. Without it, transatlantic trade and security could falter, especially amid rising U.S.-EU tensions over tariffs in 2025. South Korea is a tech giant and U.S. ally, crucial for semiconductors and consumer electronics. Companies like Samsung and SK Hynix supply chips that power American devices and defense systems. In 2025, South Korea also invests heavily in U.S. bonds and real estate, supporting economic stability. If South Korea cut off relations with the U.S., semiconductor shortages would cripple industries from autos to AI, while regional security in Asia would weaken, benefiting adversaries like North Korea. Trade ties, worth over $150 billion annually, would vanish, causing inflation and job losses. Taiwan, a semiconductor superpower, is indispensable to the U.S. economy. TSMC, the world's largest chip maker, produces over 60% of global semiconductors, many of which end up in U.S. products. In 2025, Taiwan's role in tech supply chains is unmatched, supporting everything from smartphones to military hardware. If Taiwan abandoned its cooperation with the U.S., say, due to pressure from China, chip shortages will halt production, crash stock markets, and trigger inflation. Economically, U.S. reliance on Taiwanese innovation is massive, while strategically, Taiwan's stability counters China. The UK, a historic ally, remains key for financial and cultural ties. London's markets facilitate U.S. trade and investment, while the UK buys billions in American goods annually. In 2025, it's a hub for fintech and defense collaboration, supporting NATO and intelligence sharing. If the UK severed connections with the U.S., transatlantic financial flows would disrupt, raising borrowing costs for the U.S. Trade and security partnerships, critical amid global tensions, would weaken. Despite Brexit and economic challenges, the UK's role in stabilizing Western alliances is vital. Its withdrawal would erode U.S. influence in Europe and global markets. India is emerging as a critical partner, supplying IT services, pharmaceuticals, and skilled labor. In 2025, Indian firms support U.S. tech giants, while its market of 1.4 billion people drives exports. India also counters China geopolitically, aligning with the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific. If India ended its alliances with the U.S., tech outsourcing would break down, drug shortages would spike, and U.S. influence in Asia would wane. Economic ties, worth over $120 billion annually, would disappear, hitting industries like healthcare and software. Strategically, India's departure would shift global power. Brazil, a major agricultural exporter, feeds the U.S. and the world. It supplies soybeans, beef, and other commodities, stabilizing food prices. In 2025, Brazil's role in biofuels and mining also supports U.S. energy and manufacturing. If Brazil broke relations with the U.S., food inflation would soar, and supply chains for raw materials would break. Economically, U.S. farmers and consumers rely on Brazilian exports, while environmentally, its Amazon forests impact global climate efforts. Geopolitically, Brazil's stability in Latin America benefits U.S. security. Its withdrawal would disrupt food security, energy, and regional influence. Saudi Arabia, an oil powerhouse, is vital for U.S. energy security. In 2025, it's a top oil exporter, keeping global prices in check despite shifts to renewables. It also invests heavily in U.S. assets, supporting financial stability. If Saudi Arabia terminated its ties with the U.S., oil prices could spike, crashing economies reliant on cheap energy. Strategically, its role in OPEC and Middle East stability counters Iran, benefiting U.S. security. Recent tensions over tariffs and human rights haven't diminished this dependency. Its departure would trigger energy crises, inflation, and geopolitical chaos. Australia, a loyal ally, supplies critical minerals like lithium and iron ore, essential for U.S. tech and defense. In 2025, it's also a major agricultural exporter and investor in American infrastructure. If Australia cut off relations with the U.S., shortages of raw materials would stall industries, while its Pacific presence would weaken U.S. strategies against China. Trade ties, worth billions annually, would vanish, raising costs. Geopolitically, Australia's role in AUKUS and regional stability is irreplaceable. Its withdrawal would expose U.S. vulnerabilities in resources, trade, and security. Singapore, a global trade hub, is critical for U.S. commerce and logistics. In 2025, it facilitates shipping, finance, and tech innovation, connecting the U.S. to Asia. Its port handles massive U.S. imports and exports, while its stability attracts investment. If Singapore ended its partnerships with the U.S., trade routes would disrupt, raising costs and delaying goods. Financially, its role in global markets supports U.S. economic stability. Strategically, it counters China and Southeast Asia. Its departure would choke U.S. supply chains, inflate prices, and weaken regional influence. The Netherlands, a key European partner, is vital for trade and agriculture. It's the U.S.'s fifth largest export market in Europe, buying goods like aircraft and chemicals. In 2025, it also supplies high-tech equipment and invests in American startups. If the Netherlands withdrew from its alliances with the U.S. exports would drop and supply chains for specialty goods would break. Financially, its role in European stability supports transatlantic ties. Geopolitically, it strengthens NATO and counters Russian influence. Its withdrawal would erode U.S. economic and strategic positions. South Africa, a regional powerhouse, supplies minerals like platinum and gold, critical for U.S. industry and jewelry. In 2025, it also exports agricultural products and supports regional stability in Africa. If South Africa severed connections with the U.S., material shortages would disrupt manufacturing, while its role in African trade would weaken U.S. influence. Economically, its markets drive U.S. exports, while geopolitically, it counters Chinese expansion. Its departure would raise costs, stall industries, and shift global power, leaving the U.S. more vulnerable in a key region. There you have it. 15 nations the U.S. can't live without. From China's manufacturing to Canada's oil, each plays a role in keeping the American economy afloat. But this interdependence also means vulnerability. In 2025, with tariffs, trade wars, and geopolitical shifts, the stakes are higher than ever. If any of these nations broke relations or ended partnerships with the U.S., the country could face supply chain crises, inflation, and security risks. What do you think? Could the U.S. adapt, or is collapse inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more on global economics. Hit that bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.